Next speaker is Rabbi Folberg.
Also to say how honored I am to be on this panel. Um, and I guess part of what I can contribute here is the perspective of someone who is a working congregational clergy person, a working rabbi, and kind of what's going on here in Austin and in my community. I want to kind of do this by kind of running through what I think were some really interesting and fruitful questions that we got by email. And the first one was, how would you interpret this pandemic from a religious viewpoint? And I thought about that and said, that's huge. You know, how do I even work my way into that? But I think of all the things that someone might say, I would focus on this. I once heard a scholar speaking about religion in general and monotheism in particular, and he said, the monotheistic traditions like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, we have to be careful, because he said there is a possibility for great light in our traditions that comes from the understanding that if there is, as there is one God, so everything is ultimately one and united and connected, and we're all one humanity and we're all one people, and these divisions and these differences that we see between people are trivial in comparison to our shared humanity. He said that's the sort of, as he put it, the light side. He said the other path, which is a much darker path, is one that says, yes, there is one God, and I have the only route to that God, or I have the best route, or I have, right? And it's, he said, it's a short distance between that and therefore the way you do it is inferior, has to be suppressed. The only reason I'm bringing that up is because for me, from a religious standpoint, maybe a theological standpoint, if there is anything that we might live through that reminds us that the divisions between different groups of human beings are essentially an illusion, that they don't really exist, that it really is all one, and that we as human beings are all one, it's this. It is this, because this pandemic has no boundaries, it has no borders, it has no religious belief, it has no cultural prejudices, it just is. And we are being asked to quarantine, for example, in order that we might take care of strangers whom we will never meet, and to care about their well-being as much as we care about the well-being of people that we love and adore and who are close to us. I certainly, in my heart of hearts, wish that there were a less painful, tragic, and destructive way to remind us of our oneness, of our connection. But I think that's one, theologically, if I can use a kind of maybe a little bit high-flown term for that, I think that that's one way that I think of this. These boundaries, especially now, they don't really exist. How is the second question was, how is the pandemic affecting my community? So there is a tremendous emphasis in Jewish tradition and Jewish practice on community and on coming together. And I'll give you just one little glimmer of that. So there's this idea, there's this idea in traditional Judaism of what's called a minyan, which means a numbering or a counting, but it's the idea that if you're following the traditions and you want to have a complete worship service with all the prayers that you would normally do, you need at least 10 people there, 10 adults by Jewish reckoning. So it's very, very important to bring people together. And so this is difficult and this is painful. And we are, in the congregation, many congregations, we are relying upon the same technology that we're using here. We're using Zoom and Facebook Live and all this streaming. And I was saying to someone the other day, and this reminds me, Father, of what you said. I think with every class that we are teaching online, and every Shabbat, every Sabbath service, and weekday service, and all the other things we're doing online, I think whatever the context or classes, whatever the context is, the subtext is hope, community, love, caring, you know, and trying to show concern. I think that in some ways, I was saying this to someone the other day, I think that in some ways, our congregation, our synagogue right now is more relevant on a day-to-day basis to more of our members than it's ever been, because they need all those things, and we're doing our best to give it to them, although it's a big difference between being in a room with someone and looking at them on a screen. But we're using the tools that we have. You know, pragmatically also, for congregations that are essentially small nonprofit organizations, just to look at this for a second, the current situation raises a lot of uncertainty. How far down the line are we going to be able to pay people who need to be paid? What's going to happen with that? So there's certainly a certain amount of uncertainty there too, but Father spoke about hope. We're hoping for the best and doing what we can to plan for it. Let's see. There was a question about advantages and disadvantages, but I'm really cognizant of how quickly my time is going, so I think I'm going to put that one aside. How can believers worldwide continue to practice? So this is a really interesting question. Just like Christianity is not monolithic and Islam worldwide is not monolithic, it's not one thing. There are different communities with different traditions and different cultures. Same thing goes in the Jewish community, and at least in the American Jewish community, the more liberal movements like the Reform movement, which is my congregation, or the conservative movement, certainly a lot of this technology is being leveraged. It becomes a problem, though, in those communities, for example, that strictly observe Jewish traditions around Shabbat, the Sabbath, and holidays, when traditional Jews will not use technology. They will not use the internet and computers and things like that, because it's not in keeping with the traditional view of what rest is on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. And so there it's really challenging. And I know that some folks in the Orthodox community or other sort of more traditional parts of the community are praying at home alone, which I understand that discipline, and I respect it. And there's no but. I feel sad that people are in that position, and I feel somewhat grateful that we're not committed in the same way to those structures, so we do get to use the technology. But it's difficult. It's really difficult. And I will also say to you, just, looking at my watch. Okay, so I also will say to you that we are already thinking ahead to the fall, and to the fact that the holiest days of the Jewish calendar year, Rosh Hashanah, the new year, which is usually in September, sometime late August to the latest, late September, early October, that's coming up in the fall. And then 10 days later, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the great 24-hour fast day, right? These most attended days. And thinking the odds of for example, in our congregation, the odds of our being able to pack 700 people into a sanctuary closely packed on top of each other, that is unlikely to happen. That is just unlikely to happen in any responsible way. So how are we going to do that? I was joking the other day that in our regular staff meetings in the congregation, we have lots of conversations about the future that just trail off into an ellipsis. We're in the midst of having this whole conversation, and then it just kind of goes off into a shrug, because we're planning, but we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know. There was a question about an insightful story from my community about how they overcome this ordeal and maintain their practices. I think a lot of what I am seeing is that people understand, again, for the reasons that that Father spoke about earlier. I think that people really understand that this is when they really need and can benefit from hooking into these practices that help to give our daily lives meaning and structure. I'll give you one interesting sort of confluence of this, and then I'll turn it over. I'll be done, because rabbis tend to talk too long. And it's really this. So in the Bible, in the Hebrew scriptures, there is a set of instructions that says that from Passover, from Pesach as it's called in Hebrew, you count off 7 weeks, 7 times 7 days, 49 days. On the 50th day, you have a gathering, which is called in the Jewish calendar tradition Shavuot, and Shavuot means weeks, W-E-E-K-S. So the 50th day after Passover is this festival of Shavuot. Originally, Passover was sort of a springtime harvest holiday, and later on the story of the Exodus of leaving Egypt got connected with that. And then this festival of Shavuot was about beginning the wheat harvest, the big harvest in those days at that time. And later it became associated with the story of the giving of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. So there is this Jewish practice called counting the Omer, and Omer was a measure of grain that was brought to the temple each day, the temple in Jerusalem. And there is a blessing that is said every day. Today was the 32nd day of the counting of the Omer, and you do this little blessing and you count it. And I keep reflecting upon what a gift that practice has been right now for us and for those who are engaging in it, because at a time like this when the days tend to blur together and a lot of people will look and say, wait, what day of the week is this? And every day is sort of strange and the same. To actually have this practice where you count and you know where you are each day in this period has been kind of a special gift. So yeah, I think that's the main thing I want to say. Only in sum to add, again, just picking up on what Father said earlier, that yeah, I mean, prayers for the heroes, the people on the front line, the doctors, the nurses, the people who are, like, I had to renew a prescription today, and I called the pharmacy and I said to the pharmacist before I hung up, thank you for this essential work that you're doing. I hope that you're staying safe. That's my hope, that's my prayer. And even today, literally about an hour ago, I found out that a beloved employee of our congregation's mother has COVID-19. So just hopes and prayers for everybody. I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Folberg, for your insights, especially that you mentioned pandemic doesn't have any cultural differences. So it also reminded us we are one humanity. So you also mentioned about like how community, hope, love, caring, and trying to show concern is also essential. And we are hoping for the best for everyone. And thank you for mentioning all of our prayers goes to the people in the front line of this pandemic.